First, I'll be talking about a number of things that have to be the case in order for universities to be able to exist. I'll be talking about some conditions that have to be in place, or conditions that have to be satisfied for a university to exist, to be possible, and to be well-functioning entities. Then I'll be saying a couple of things about teaching, about research, and about a vision that Christians could have, and as far as I'm concerned, should have. Well, let me not be too normative, but more inviting. I think I have a couple of thoughts that, for me, seems very interesting ideas about how we as Christians can think and should think about, well, let's get a should, can think about universities and the academic life. So the existence of universities is by no means, it's not a natural given. A number of conditions have to be satisfied for their very existence. So one very important condition that has to be satisfied is this: if in a society there is no fairly general consensus about certain things that are good for society, then universities cannot exist. Universities exist for the cause of certain goods, if there is no expectation or no belief in society that universities aim to pursue certain goods, then of course universities have no right of existence, or they simply will wither away. Now, if universities and if education is good for, or is good, then they should be good for something. Right? Things, insofar as they are good for something. Now, for what sort of goods do we need universities? Well, one very important thing, and I think it's sort of there's a broad consensus in our society that we shouldn't be ignorant. We should be knowing persons. That's just a very general open door. Like ignorance is really a much worse situation than being knowledgeable. Not anything by way of knowledge acquisition is as important as you might think, but it's at the very least better than ignorance. So we think we are all deeply convinced, at least our societal structures, they display a commitment to the importance and the great value of is it a word of dispellation, or the getting rid of ignorance? That's a great value. We value knowledge, and that's why we value, at least that's why we think that our society values universities. Universities exist, at least in part, for the transmission of knowledge. A second good that universities strive after is to induce new generations into certain areas of research. They induce new generations of students, youngsters, into acquiring certain academic habits, to acquire ideas about how to do research, how to find out things, how to do it in responsible ways. And it's not only research which we associate with the natural sciences, but there's also scholarship, responsible scholarship about text. So I was struck yesterday by a couple of talks that I heard about the great value of being capable of interpreting biblical text, but also the ability to interpret Shakespeare or to interpret so many other documents. And you can see what happens when uninformed people start to read or start to interpret really difficult text or old text, older than 2,000 years, when there's no sensitivity of historical context and the like. So we need universities in order to induct new generations of readers in old text, in the reading of old text. And I think the reading of text is extremely important. We tend to forget that our culture is built on, that's sort of like big picture thought. Our culture is built the Western European culture is built on, let's say, 500 really great minds. Einstein is one of them, Shakespeare is one of them, Goethe is one of them, Augustine is one of them. 500 great minds. And all the rest of us, what we're doing is we're placing footnotes to their work. We are trying to point out, these were really smart people. They had a lot of things to say of great value. We are fortunate enough to be able to recognize those values, and we are sort of handing them on to our students. That's an important task for universities. If we don't value these 500 big people, the great minds, if we don't value them, well, then there is less reason for universities to exist. So that was my second point about what we need universities for. We need universities in order to induct students in a tradition of getting acquainted with the great minds of the past. A third thing we hear a lot about is we need universities in order to make, or to so that our students will acquire intellectual competences. So there's a lot of competent thinking in these educational people. I'm not going to talk much about it. It's important, critical thinking, try to think clearly, know how to distinguish a valid from an invalid argument, know what will be needed in order to support a certain premise, or know what's needed in order to make a case for a certain claim, and so forth. That's a task of the university. To make sure that students acquire intellectual competences. Also, very important, it seems to me, has to do with moral formation. We need universities to morally form people. When you look at the older documents about Cambridge and Oxford, moral formation was always one of the main aims of the university. We don't hear that much about moral formation, at least in the official discourse about universities these days. I think it's extraordinarily important that we take that upon ourselves. How we should do that, that's another matter, but it's the task of the university to morally sensibilitize our students. And here, there's something of what I feel arises of what I think of as the university paradox. Universities cannot exist unless certain values are affirmed. I'll mention many more values later on. At the same time, the university is a place where values are under constant attack. So it seems, we're trying to sit on the branch that we are constantly trying to sow off. That's a tricky position to be in. And I think as Christians within the university, we ought to point out our institutions cannot continue to exist unless we acknowledge certain values. Another good for that university should try to uphold is just intelligent reflection on what science is. Intelligent reflection on what the value of science is, what we may expect of it, what we should not expect of it. And of course, there's a task of the university to prepare students for professional practices, right? When you go to law school, medical school, and the like, these are preparations for professional lives. Well, it should have struck us by now how important values are when you start to think about the university. At the same time, it strikes me, at least in the Dutch context, how little discussion of values there is. As a matter of fact, the university seems to be the place, as I already indicated, where values, well, they lead a troubled existence. And it seems to me that values are as real as as physical facts. So when we move about in this room, we make sure we don't bump on the table, or we try to make sure we don't kick over the cup and the like. These are real things that we try to be sensitive to. But values are real as well. Sure, values aren't physical facts, but values, they have a, so to speak, if I'm allowed to speak metaphorically, they live a life of their own. They are very, very real. Just two examples to make that clear. I take them from Mike Sandel's book, What Money Can't Buy. So he says, sure, in our actions, we are guided by the reality of certain values. He gives many illustrations of the point, but I just give two. Suppose I want to be your friend. Well, you don't like me at all that much, but I offer you €1,000 per month in order to be my friend. Well, I'm sure if I pay you €1,000 per month and you agree to the conditions, then, well, we would meet one another, we may exchange letters, or we may go to movies. But still, being a friend, becoming a friend by paying money, it seems that money can't buy these sorts of things. Why? So suppose I start paying all my actual friends money. Well, by doing that, I would drown out the very value of friendship. The very value that makes friendship such a remarkable thing would go away if I start paying my friends. Or think about it, or another example. Suppose we think, well, Nobel Prizes, these procedures of the Nobel Prize Committee. I've talked with a couple of people on the Nobel Prize committees. Well, they are elaborate procedures. Well, there must be simpler ways to hand out Nobel Prizes. Let them go just to the highest bidder. You know, and I'm very rich, so I buy a Nobel Prize for myself. Well, at the moment I buy a Nobel Prize, I haven't bought of anything of any value. So it's a real thing, value, or at least the value of a Nobel Prize. It's a real thing. It's not reality. I'm speaking very loosely, not reality of the sort that physical objects have reality, but they are real. And in our lives, we are constantly guided by value, and also in the academic life. And although, as I already said, there is this university paradox, at certain low points in the academic life, we see that values are hailed. Namely, when there has been academic misconduct, the fabrication of data, or when there have been irresponsible research practices. Then the university is too small to eliminate these elements from the university. So even though the university is a place where values lead a difficult life, at the academic low points of life, at the low points of academic life, we seem to be capable to acknowledge them. Everyone, even my most naturalistic colleagues, they will acknowledge no fabrication of data, surely not. Well, that's an acknowledgement of value. These were conditions that have to be in place in order for the university to serve certain goods having to do with education. There are also certain values or certain conditions that have to be satisfied in order for the university to be a place of research. One condition that should be in place is the wide acknowledgement of truth. We can make head nor tail of what academic life is all about if we don't accept there is such a thing as truth. It may be difficult to get at, it may be sometimes very hard to know what is true in a particular area, but unless there's a shared belief that there is such a thing as truth, universities simply cannot exist. Then it would be something else. It would be, very interesting company of fairy-telling people. It wouldn't be an academic institution. Another important condition that must be in place in order for the university to be an institution that has, with scientific value or merit, is that big parts of the world have the properties they have, independent of these properties being known or believed or having been encountered by human beings. So what I'm saying, philosophically speaking, is that certain realistic interpretations, certain forms of realism must be true in order for the academy to make sense. And of course, what also must be the case and must be acknowledged is that the world behaves in a uniform way. It's a regular world we live in. We should assume that. Unless we assume that, there's no point to science. If the world changes every second, there are no deep structures, no deep connections beneath all the superficial patterns, changing patterns that we see all the time. And the final thing that must be accepted, must be a condition that must be satisfied, is that people believe that at the very least they are to some extent capable of knowing the world. So we must have a certain modicum of trust in ourselves. We are the sort of beings that are capable of knowing at least certain truths about the world. My contention is that anyone who radically, so there has been a lot of philosophical discussion about each of these points, but my contention is that anybody who radically dismisses these points, in fact, dismisses the university. That person cannot acknowledge the value of the university, cannot understand its actual operation. That person is, in effecto, aborting the university. So I think this is an important point. Universities, we value them. Still, it's a precarious thing, universities. They can only exist under certain conditions, certain belief conditions. Of course, there are also financial conditions and the like, but I wasn't talking about that. So now I want to say a few things about Abraham Kuyper. So Abraham Kuyper, he founded the Free University of Amsterdam. And what Kuyper noted was something that people didn't like that he noted, namely that academics very often disagree among themselves. People being confronted with what would seem for all the world to be the same evidence, draw different conclusions from them. They come to different theories. How is that to be explained? How should we understand that? Well, Kuyper said basically two things. Well, I have to retract some of what I just said, but the first, not right now. So one reason why there's disagreement among academics has to do with different presuppositions from which academics depart when they start to evaluate the evidence. And the second point, and here I have to retract a bit, not all academics acknowledge the same sources of evidence. I'll say a bit more about these 2 points. So there is diversity among academics, there is disagreement among academics, says Kuyper, first of all because academics tend to proceed from different starting points. They proceed from different propositions. In modern terms, naturalism, right? That's the rage all these days among academics. We are all supposed to be naturalists. And it is nowadays often said that naturalism is a presupposition of doing serious science. Right? It's the idea that there is no supernatural world, that there is no God, or there's no godlike being, no angels, or no immaterial substances. There are only natural things. Well, a lot of it's unclear, right? What exactly are natural things? Are numbers? Are they natural things? Are universals? Are they natural things or not? Are norms for instance, the laws of logic, are they natural things or not? Well, there's a lot of unclarity about all these things. But you can see, sure, some people who self-identify as a naturalist, that's their starting point. But it's not the only possible starting point. Theists may have a much more broader conception of what reality, what the world is like, and they won't have such a narrowed in sort of approach of the evidence that's forthcoming. Now, a second element of the explanation for diversity within the academia has to do with the acknowledgement of sources of knowledge. So there are many sources of knowledge, I should think, and so Kuiper thought, right? So there, perception, that's an important source of knowledge. Visual perception, another for each one of us individually, an important source of knowledge is our memories. Many things that we now know, we know through the workings of our memories. Reason is a source of knowledge. Some things we can only know through reason, it would seem, right? That nothing can be red and green all over at the same time. We don't. If I tell my students, is the following thing true? Is the following proposition true? Nothing can be red and green all over. And they said, well, we're going to find it out. Just investigate the world. Well, that's not red and green all over. That's not red. That's not. Just rational reflection teaches us these sort of things. So we may know through reason a lot of things. There is, on the sort of approach that Kuiper favored, that I also favor, we have the ability to know certain moral truths, normative truths. God endowed us with certain capacities. And of course, there's revelation. Certain things we cannot know on our own steam, so to speak, but God has communicated them to us. Now, if we are really serious about acquiring knowledge of the world or acquiring knowledge of what is, then sure, we should draw on all those sources of evidence that are available to us. As a sort of intellectual diet, you could say, well, I abstract from what I may know by revelation, or what I may know by the moral sense, or by moral intuition, or I may abstract from what I know by reason, these are all interesting exercises. But if these sources of evidence are available to you, why shouldn't you use them? So that's the second reason why Kuiper thought there is disagreement within the academia. Different sources of knowledge are acknowledged by different persons. And so Kuiper's ideal for the university was, let's acknowledge as many serious sources of knowledge that we have on our hands. So including what we may know through faith or through revelation. Okay, now I'd like to say something about how Christians could view universities. So Kuiper's idea was we should use, as Christians, all the sources of evidence that we have. Still, this doesn't quite answer the following question. To what end do we educate students? To what end do we make investigations or inquiries? To what end do we educate our students? What do we like to see them? What would we like to see in them? Why educate at all? What's the point of it? Well, with this question, it's about the same as with the question, well, why do we live at all? What's the point of it? And these two questions, I do think, hang together in an important way. The moment you have a view as to why we live, you can derive from it certain things as to why or to what end we educate students. So the traditional Christian approach to the meaning of life was, well, we live in order to get to know God, to serve our fellows, and to enjoy God's presence now and forever. That's the aim of living. Or if that's the aim, or if that's the meaning of life, then the educational goals can be in a way derived from that. Anything that helps individuals and groups of people to attain that goal, those things should be furthered. And when you look back in the tradition at the formulations of the aims of education, you find really beautiful statements. So here I have one by Bernardus of Clairvaux. He says, there are people that like to know simply to be known as knowers. That's vanity. There are people who like to know in order to know. That's curiosity. There are people who like to know in order to be edified. That's wisdom. And there are people who like to know in order to edify. That's love. So Bernardus' view of education was, we educate in order for others to become so wise that they will be able to love others. The idea wasn't we want to know things just in order to know them. Well, I mean, sure, we are also curious, but that's not the ultimate goal of it. The ultimate goal is that we are being made capable to serve God, to serve His world, and to be responsible agents in God's world. And I'd like to think that Christians should think about what they're doing within the academy along these lines. So, in my department, although I'm in the philosophy department, you should think that at least sometimes we should talk about wisdom. Well, that's not a very common topic. I don't think, Daniel, in your department, there will be a lot of discussion about wisdom or how we can help fostering wisdom among our students. Now, there's a second idea, and here I'm much influenced by my former promoter or PhD supervisor, Nicholas Wolterstorff. So he has written extensively on education, and he says, well, the aim of education should be, couched in a biblical term, should be shalom. Then he starts unpacking this notion of shalom. So we usually translate the biblical word shalom with peace. But shalom is certainly more than just the absence of conflict. Sure, if there is to be shalom, there should be absence of conflict. But that's certainly not enough. For, as is well documented, many slaves in the United States in the 19th century, they were on good speaking terms with their owners. There was no serious conflict between them. Still, we wouldn't think, certainly not now any longer, that was a condition of shalom. Why not? Well, because certain fundamental rights that the slaves had were being trampled upon by the slave owners. So there cannot be a condition of shalom unless certain rights are being acknowledged. So I start to come thinking about education and the academic life also in terms of rights. Rights that students have, rights that I have, rights that need to be acknowledged. And it gives a certain holiness to the whole enterprise. We shouldn't violate the rights of others. As a matter of fact, we are constantly called upon to acknowledge the rights that others have. And others are called upon to acknowledge our rights. And if my dear friend Nicholas Wolterstorff is right, then the whole talk about fundamental rights or indigenous rights, that's a biblical concept. It came to us not through the French Revolution or to the French revolutionary thinkers, it comes from the Old Testament prophets, where you're being called, or where the audience is being called upon to take care of the rights of widows and orphans and the like. And there's a lot of rights talk among the prophets. So, Shalom is a situation in which there is an absence of conflict, but that's not all. Rights should be acknowledged, but that's not all. There's a third element in Shalom, and that's the element of enjoyment, of fulfillment. So I know a lot of colleagues, they are running all the time. They're working very hard to further their career, to get their papers published, and I work also hard. But occasionally, one day a week, I sit back and I try to relax. What you talked about this morning as well. A situation of Shalom is also, well, to speak in biblical terms, to sit below the vintage tree, right? Or is it the olive tree, sit in the shade and just be happy and merry for what you have been able to accomplish, just like God himself sat back and enjoyed the work of his hands on the seventh day. Now, what I should like to think of as the goal of education has to do with Shalom. So I think that Christians within academia, their big picture aim should be the furthering of Shalom. That's a very big thing. That's a very tall order. But I find, that I can't live without this, without a somewhat bigger vision. And in one of the Psalms we read that without a vision, the people perish. So, especially when we are philosophers, I think we should try to strike these larger chords within academia and say, academic life, as it was traditionally conceived of, was much bigger than, just getting our papers published. It has to do with wisdom. It has to do with, getting at home in the world, doing good things, trying to be of service to other people, and those sorts of things, trying to develop creation. And I do think an effect of academia or universities where Shalom is a goal, is that people will be willing to really bear responsibility, professional responsibilities for the students, of course. We should bear responsibilities for our families, for our kids, insofar as we have them, and for many, many other things. So these were some thoughts about how Christians could think about the aim of education within academia. So wisdom, the fostering of wisdom, but also the Shalom vision. Now just some thoughts on universities and research. So I do think it's an important job of universities, apart from doing science, to reflect on the meaning of science. Of course, here I just betray that I'm a philosopher who are habitually in the reflective mode. So it's one thing to do science, it's another thing to reflect on what it is that we're doing when we are doing science. So what may we expect of it? What should we not expect of it? So I gave a talk at a forum that perhaps some of you were present at about the importance of acknowledging the limits of science. Science is a very important thing, but it's limited. Just as, to repeat the example I gave, my guitar is a very important instrument for me, but I simply cannot get the golden bronze sound out of it that I can't get out of a tuba. That's nothing against my guitar, it's just an acknowledgement of a fact about what I may legitimately expect or not expect from my guitar. So science, important for many things, you can do many things with it, Many projects can be pursued through science, but not often. There are certain limitations. So I think it's an important task of the university to help its members to reflect on the value and the nature of science. Now, what I'd like to do is, if I'm still not running out of time, to say some things about the nature of scientific knowledge. So that's one object of reflection on science. What's the nature of scientific knowledge? Talk a little bit about sources and methods of science. Share some thoughts about the neutrality or the supposed neutrality of science, and then say something about how religious worldviews can legitimately play a role among scientists. Right, so how am I doing time-wise? I'm on my legs, I'm losing track of the time.
25 minutes.
All right, but we want to have some interaction, I suppose.
We'll have evaluations after that.
Right, evaluations after that. So then let me talk some 10 more minutes, and then there will be some place for interaction. So, as you might guess, this is not a professional philosophy talk that I'm giving. It's a broad picture thing. It's a sort of thing that no one really cares to do when he's serious about his own field of investigation. So I'm serious about this bigger thing, and I also know that I don't put any academic credentials, or I don't earn academic credentials by that. On the other hand, that's certainly not the most important thing in life. So one thing about the nature of scientific knowledge that I'd like to put forward, or I'd like to broach here, is this. Whenever we study things in a scientific manner, we are always abstracting from certain properties that objects have, and we are all the time concentrating on certain other properties. To give the homely example of Galileo's experiments on the Tower of Pisa. So when he let loose these balls in order to measure the velocity of those balls, they were, I think, what's the English word for that? Balls? No? Cannonballs? Gambles?
Cannonballs from the cannon.
Cannonballs, right. Now, of course, these cannonballs, they had colors. They were owned by certain people. They had a whole history. They were made at a particular place by particular persons. They moved through space, or were moved through space in a particular way, and then Galileo got them in his hands, and he performed his experiments with them. Now, of course, when he worked with these cannonballs, he was abstracting from all these things, and he was concentrating on the mass of the object. All these, so he said true things about the speed and the velocity and the acceleration of speed of the cannonballs, but he didn't say anything about all these other properties. So when you might think this is just a very superficial or initial thought that can be elaborated much further, you might think that when we study scientifically the world, we are concentrating on certain aspects, or we search out certain properties of things, and we abstract from many other properties. Now, I think it's harsh within the university when we don't reflect at all on how the different sciences hang together. So, well, I just happen to do physics. Well, how it is with biology, well, I don't care. I don't know. I have no idea. Well, I do think as responsible academics, we should have some view as to how all the various fields of investigation hang together. So one initial way that seems to me fruitful to explore, and actually that will be my job in this university project that we will be going on for the next 3 years, is to reflect philosophically on how the various sciences hang together. Now, here's an initial thought. You might think that physics concentrates on certain properties of objects and abstracts from a number of other properties. Well, sociology concentrates on other properties of the very same object. I mean, these cannonballs, right? There's a whole sociology of cannonballs that can be written. Well, physicists don't concentrate on those ones, or don't concentrate on those properties. So here's just the big picture view. The various sciences, they look at the same thing, but concentrate on different properties. And we should acknowledge that the world and that objects in the world, they display a variety of different properties. So what I'm saying is, scientific knowledge is abstract knowledge. That doesn't entail that it's false, what scientists are saying about the world, not at all. But it is saying that in a way, it's abstract knowledge. That knowledge abstracts from serious properties that the world and the objects in it are displaying all the time. So abstraction doesn't mean that you start saying false things about the world. You may say true things, but you don't say, as a physicist, all true things that can be said about the things that you're studying. You may say important truths, but you're not saying other things that are true as well. We need other scientists for that. So that's something I'd like to learn more about in the next few years. What views can we develop as to how the different fields of investigation or the various sciences, how they hang together. And when I talk about this topic with my colleagues outside of the philosophy department, it strikes me that they don't have any views on that. And I think that's harsh. That's harsh on us all. We put billions of euros and dollars in academic research, but where's the big picture? How does it all hang together? And I think as Christians, we bear responsibility for putting these themes on the agenda and to help clear up things here. Another big point, another big issue has to do with science and how we think about science is the supposed or the alleged neutrality of science. So I've read many accounts of science that say that science should be value neutral. Science should be value neutral. Well, it seems for at least 3 reasons that cannot be correct. So first of all, if you say that science ought to be value neutral, well, value neutrality itself is a value, right? So this cannot be coherently maintained. This is not a serious proposal. Value neutrality is a value itself. Now, moreover, the most important value, I should think, and I'm in agreement with Daniel here, is truth. The prime epistemic goal of science is to know truth about the world or about the objects that we are studying. Well, truth is a value. Truth obviously is a value. So value-free science, that's an oxymoron. And third, as I already suggested earlier on, the pursuit of science can only exist when we start to acknowledge certain values. Values such as honesty, or precision, or caution, or prudence, or even-handedness, or open-mindedness. So long as we don't acknowledge the values of all these things, we will never have serious science. These are values that must be acknowledged by scientists and by academics in order for their work to be valuable. So I should say no shalom within the academia unless these values are affirmed and are upheld. Well, it's a strange thing. How do you uphold norms? Or, I'm sorry, how do you uphold values? Well, I'd like to think of it as we have these high points in academic life. You know, the opening of the academic year, we have the yearly celebration of the university's birthday. Well, these are high points in the academic life where we can affirm and reaffirm these highly important values, because we also know that they so easily get compromised within on a day-to-day basis within the academia. So there should be places, and there should be moments in the life of the academy where we simply say to each other out aloud, and we can do it in many ways, you know, by bringing to mind or tell the life story of an important academic who really did his best to, or her best, to live out or to be serious about these values. In many ways, I should think you can do it. You have to be creative, but it's important, because unless we do it, they erode. Another view about the relation between science and values is this, that some people argue that when it comes to the internal operation of science and the selection of research topics, we shouldn't be led by values. Well, again, that seems to me a very, very strange idea. Sure, there are so many things, so many truths we can try to find out by means of science. We can do it all, so values should guide us. And there are, right, the financial means for the scientific pursuit are limited, so they have to be distributed. Well, what's the distribution mechanism? Well, that must be informed by values, I should think. There is a way, though, in which science should not be influenced by values of a particular sort. So I think that's. So what I'm trying to do is to disambiguate the claim science should not be informed by values. So here's a way in which science indeed should not be informed by values. So people have private interest. Also academics, they have private interest. Well, I don't think that your private interest should feed into your research. So in the Netherlands, we had some bad cases of pharmacologists at universities, you know, who did research that were really instrumental for furthering the cause of their own company they run in their private time. So no private interests, no group interests, no exercise of sheer muscular power, so to speak. That should not influence the academic life at all. So those sorts of values, at least when people say science should not be encumbered by values, this is sometimes what they mean, and here I totally agree. That should not be done. And the final thing, and then before I stop, is that they also say science should not be so science should be value neutral in this peculiar, specific sense that science shouldn't be influenced by worldviews or by religious convictions. That's sometimes also what's meant by that claim. Well, I think it may be helpful to make a couple of distinctions here. So first of all, religious and worldviews may have motivational force for those people who are doing science, who are living an academic life. I don't think there's anything wrong with religious convictions or worldviews playing this motivational role in the life of academics. You know, a couple of my colleagues, they are Marxists. Well, I have no problem with them being motivated by their worldview. I don't think it doesn't necessarily give them other results than the results that I have. You know, when we're doing formal logic, for instance, well, it motivates them. I have another motivation. I don't think there's anything deeply wrong with that. Another way in which religions and religious views or worldviews can play into or feed into the academic pursuit is that worldviews and religions, they give us certain assumptions. We make certain religious assumptions and we proceed from there. And sometimes it's said that's illegitimate. 10 minutes. Well, I'll just finish this little thought. Now, I already mentioned, or I dropped the word naturalism. Within academia, many people think that naturalism is something we should all embrace. Well, I disagree. I don't think we should embrace naturalism. On the other hand, there may be a place for naturalism within academia, but there may also be a place for non-naturalism in academia. So we could think of research projects in this conditional way. And I do think that many research projects that I'm aware of and that we are all aware of, they have this conditional nature. If we assume that naturalism is true, then how should we think about morality? Or how should we think about the value of human persons? Or how should we think about international development? Well, that seems like an interesting thing, maybe at least to certain people. And I should like to think, or the sort of research program that I'd like to work from is, well, if we assume Christianity to be true, then how can we think about psychological disorders? Or then how can we think about gravity? Or how can we think about natural laws? Or how can we think about morality? So there are these conditional research projects. If we make these and these assumptions, then how should we think about that and that? I think there's a legitimate place within academia to have these, to pursue these conditional. And so, an interesting, I think, implication of this view is even an atheist may engage in a Christian way of pursuing science. I mean, an atheist can ask the following question: if Christianity is true, then what's the most sensible way to think about that and so? I'm saying this because there are so many Christians who think in the other way. They think, if we assume that naturalism is true, then how should we think about that and so? I know many Christians who also think, well, we should adopt some form of naturalism, at least within academia. Now, my point is, and I'll close off with that, it remains important that if you embark on these conditional research programs, that you continue to think about them as programs that give their results only conditional on certain presuppositions. And you shouldn't conclude from there, now look, we have these results, and therefore these presuppositions must be true. That's a non sequitur, or it's a form of circular reasoning. So as Christians, I think that we should be very sensitive to values. We should try to uphold within academia values, because from our perspective, values are deeply connected with the Lord Himself in ways that I won't be able to go into now, but right, so what I've been trying to say is we should have a vision for the university. We should be sensitive to all the conditions that have to be satisfied in order for academia to be possible, academic teaching, academic investigation. All these things must be acknowledged, and if they aren't acknowledged, academia will wither away. They'll become irrelevant, and they become places where we have nothing to expect from. And Christians, they should also, given the history of the academies in the world, there is this rich tradition that we can try to draw on and point people towards. So